Thanks, John. Good morning, my name is Eoin Hurley. I'm an access consultant. We specialise in carrying out access audits, disability access audits. We are also involved in Part M and Civil certified under the building control regulations and so on. You can find out more details on our website. Just asked here today to just give a quick overview on the implications of Part M in relation to building control. So the overview of the presentation is quickly just to highlight some barriers faced by people with disabilities as they go about their daily lives. The legislation that has an impact on accessibility in Ireland. Also to look at, a case study. We've recently been involved in a number of school projects and a number of issues have come up during construction. I just want to highlight some examples of where accessibility can go wrong and how that has an impact on sign-off on completion. And then just a quick conclusion on, I suppose, why accessibility is important, but also the implications of the building control regs and how accessibility needs to be incorporated in all stages of projects and so on. So quickly, I suppose, just the barriers faced by people with disabilities. Just so you're aware, about 600,000 people in Ireland living with a disability, 80 million people in Europe, but they also say that about 40% of the population will be affected by access. So whether you're a parent with a buggy or whether you're someone with a broken leg and things like that. So everyone will be affected by accessibility at some stage during the course of their lives. But just some of the barriers: access to public transport, for example. People with vision impairments constantly complain when the dark driver turns off the audible announcements. They don't know if they're going to be in Dún Laoghaire or in Bray and so on. Access to public buildings, even though we've got a Disability Act in Ireland, access to public buildings is still a complaint made by people with disabilities. Access to protected structures. There are national guidelines around making protected structures accessible for people with disabilities. So I can come up to me afterwards and I can give you more information on that. Access to housing, and also looking at access to sporting and leisure activities. So there's statistics out there to say that 50% of people with disabilities have never participated in sporting or leisure activities, and one of the reasons is due to inaccessible buildings or inaccessible premises. So that's quite important there. In relation to legislation in Ireland, everyone in the building area knows about the building control regulations and building regulations. You're aware that Part M of our building regulation was updated in 2010. It came into operation on the 1st of January 2012. Part M is entitled Access and Use. I'll go through that in a second. There are 3 other pieces of legislation that have an impact on accessibility, including the health and safety legislation. So if you're an employer, you have to ensure that your employees have access in the workplace. That's covered under Regulation 25 of the 2007 Health and Safety, Health and Welfare Work Regulations. We also have an Equal Status Act in Ireland and a Disability Act. The Equal Status Act is all about making sure that services are accessible for all people. And if you are a service provider, you can't discriminate against people with disabilities in the provisions of goods and services that you provide. Also, the Disability Act, that relates to public bodies only, but it does have rigorous requirements that public bodies have to make their public areas of their public buildings accessible to people with disabilities, and that's covered under Section 25 of the Disability Act. So that is quite important for all local authorities, all government departments and public bodies in Ireland. But I suppose really what I'm just trying to do with this slide is to highlight that it's not just Part M of the building regulations that we need to be considering, it's also the Equal Status Act, the Disability Act and the Health, Safety and Welfare at Work Act also. In relation to Part M then, most people have come across the requirements of Part M. So M1, adequate provision shall be made for people to access and use a building, its facilities and environments. Key thing here is that the requirement M1 relates to people, and that's all people regardless of their age, their size or their disability. So whereas in the Part M 2000 it was very much focused on access for people with disabilities, the new Part M, as I call it, is focused on access for all people regardless of age, size or disability, and it's very much focused on universal design. We'll talk about universal design in a few minutes. The other thing is that if you're doing works to extensions, you have to ensure that, the other thing is that the Part M 2010 not only covers the building, it also covers the facilities and environment. So your car parking, your approach routes, your lighting, your signage and approach and so on. In relation to access to extensions, if you're designing an extension, be aware that you must ensure that people can get into the extension, and also they must be able to use the toilet facilities associated with that extension. But one, by providing new toilets within the extension, or alternatively upgrading maybe existing toilets that are in close proximity to the extension itself. that's where you're not providing new toilets in the extension. I mentioned universal design, and really just highlighting that the part M itself is very much focused around universal design. Neil Murphy will be presenting later from the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design, and he'll be able to tell you more about UD. But you can see there, universal design refers to the design and composition of the environment so that it can be accessed, understood and used by all people, to the greatest extent possible by all people regardless of their age, their size or their disability. There is a website there as well that you can get more information on universaldesign.ie. But really I'm just highlighting that the principles in Part M are based around universal design, and there's a shift away from just catering for, I suppose, people with disabilities. When we're doing training, we do a lot of training with architects, design teams and local authorities and things like that. And one thing that we like to highlight to them is that Part M applies to different works in different ways. So for example, if you're doing an extension to a building, you need to ensure that people can get to the extension, as I've already mentioned, and the extension itself needs to be fully accessible. If you're doing material alterations to an existing building, all those alterations need to be fully accessible as well. So I just highlight this, so I won't go through the full detail, but I suppose I'm just highlighting that there is a few important sections in the introduction to the technical guidance document that show you how to actually apply Part M to different types of works that you might be doing. Really highlighting that if you're doing a material change of use, it's slightly different than a material alteration and so on, because there's more onerous requirements that you must also follow. So if you have your copy of your technical guidance document, refer to page 11 and 12, gives you how you apply Part M to different types of works. So as I mentioned, we have a technical guidance document, and really what we're highlighting here is that TGDM is the guidance that you use to comply with the requirements of M1 of the building regulations. It's broken into its 4 parts. Part M, the requirement. Section 1, access and use of buildings other than dwellings. Section 2, access and use of existing buildings other than dwellings. And Section 3, which is access and use of dwellings. The important thing here, again, we like to highlight to design teams is that no matter if you're doing a new building or an existing building, you always must try and implement the guidance in Section 1 of TGM. However, there may be some instances where it's not practical to meet the guidance in Section 1 for existing buildings, and you're then allowed to use the guidance in Section 2. But I suppose really the importance of this slide is that some architects and design teams think when they're working on existing buildings they can automatically go to Section 2, but that's not the case. You must always try and implement the guidance in Section 1 first. So that's just trying to give you a bit of a breakdown of the technical guidance document itself. Just to give you the case study then, which is just a school that we've worked on a number of schools recently, and I suppose we're really highlighting where accessibility can go wrong during the construction of the project. And I suppose it can go wrong in all of the areas of the design. For example, in relation to approaches to buildings, we have an image up there of a set of steps. The steps themselves have cordite tactile warnings at the top and bottom. But when the guys on site went to put in the tactile paving, they put in the tactile paving that was applicable for cycle lanes. So they put in the wrong type of tactile paving, and they didn't put in visual contrasting nosings on the steps, so they had to go away and change the steps as well. There was an instance where they put down a number of crossing points, so tactile paving crossing points to guide people with visual impairments across the road. But what they actually did was they laid the crossing points, so the image here in the middle, they laid down the crossing point so that the person with visual impairment was guided right out into the middle of the road rather than to the opposite crossing point. So I suppose there's a lot of people involved in the design of the tactile paving, whether it's the roads engineers, whether it's the contractors on the site or the subcontractors, and it can go wrong in a number of different areas there. External signage, a key area, signage both internally and externally in the building. It can all go wrong in the design of signage, whether it's the location of arrows, whether it's the type of symbols people use, the heights of the font, the colour contrast and so on. So signage is very important as well. A number of instances where doors were opening out into circulation routes and there was no barriers to protect people with visual impairments and so on. So if you have doors opening out onto circulation routes, make sure you have barriers to protect people so they don't get hit by doors and things like that. And design of cycle lanes. Relating to entrance to the buildings then, a few things where it went wrong, including things like ensure that the design of your glazed manifestations and your glazed panels provide adequate visual contrast in the background. So if you are putting manifestations up on glass panels, make sure that you provide them with adequate visual contrast in various lighting conditions, so during the day and during the night. Door widths, again, even though you think you wouldn't be going wrong with door widths, we had a number of instances where the effective clear width didn't take into account door handles and so on. And also, you need to ensure that you test all your doors to make sure that the opening forces aren't too heavy to meet the needs of, again, people with reduced mobility. In relation to circulation, things went wrong. I'll just give you a few examples. The design and fit out of the lifts. So the lifts weren't fitted with visual contrasting handrails. The floor covers were the wrong colours. We had instances where control panels didn't visually contrast from their surroundings. No mirrors on back walls and things like that. So again, the procurement and the tendering is very important. The supplier will tell you the lift is EN 8170 compliant, but in reality it doesn't meet all the requirements of section 1.3 of TGDM. We've had instances where the lack of clear headroom underneath stairwells, where you need to maintain 2.1 metres underneath a stairwell. When you actually go on site, there's people could walk in underneath stairs and so on. It can all go wrong in the design of toilets. So everything from the distance that the sink needs to be located from the actual the front of the cistern, the types of grab rails so that they provide visual contrast. We've had instances where doors are opening into toilets rather than opening out. Right versus left-hand transfer, so if you have more than one toilet, you provide both right and left-hand transfer and so on. And the images on the bottom there are just an example of where in our DAC application we said that the tea stations within the canteens would be accessible, and on site the lads just put in the standard height sinks and work counters, and then you can see as a result of doing our inspections, you can see that they've put in the lower counter, access to the sink is provided, and also access to the making tea and coffee and things like that. Other areas like testing of loops and your hearing induction loops at your reception desks and in your auditoriums and so on. And then finally, aids to communication. Things like making sure your signage is designed to meet the needs of section 1.6.3 of TGDM, but also the British standards. That includes things like visual contrast, that includes the height of the signs, that includes things like locations of arrows and so on. Glaze manifestations, visual contrast, so the image on the bottom left there, where you've got good visual contrast between the floors, the walls, the doors, the signage and things like that. You've got the accessible car parking bays, where again you've got good visual contrast between the hatched area at the side and actually the markings of the bays and so on. So there's lots of areas where accessibility can go wrong. But just to conclude, what I would say is that accessibility is a key factor in every element of the design. So the landscape architect, the roads engineer, the M&E contractor, the fire consultant, the architects themselves, they all have a role and responsibility to make sure that accessibility is addressed and monitored throughout the process. I would say that it's critical that accessibility is reviewed at all stages of projects, but most importantly at tendering stage. So after you've got your disability access cert, to ensure that all your construction drawings and your tender drawings are reviewed, to make sure that they do actually meet what they're saying in the disability access cert. I would also say all suppliers and contractors need to be made more aware of their obligations, and we should be seeking more ancillary certs from the suppliers to ensure that the floor finishes are slip resistant, we're getting the right colour, light reflective values on our floors, our walls, our doors, we're getting our loops tested and commissioned from our M&E suppliers. The lift suppliers are giving us certs and things like that. And a major problem that's happening on the ground is that accessibility happens towards the end of the project. So it's when everyone is rushing around trying to fit the signage and trying to put up the manifestations and get the project finished is when accessibility really kicks in. And that's where it can all go wrong. Because people are rushing, subcontractors aren't giving the right information and things like that, which results in a number of re-inspections taking place and changes being made on site, which will delay the whole project. If you're carrying out material alterations to existing buildings, make sure you clearly define the scope of the project so that when building control are signing off or inspecting, that they address accessibility. And finally, I would say the real conclusion is the devil is in the details. So there's a lot of detail in relation to making a building accessible, whether it's down to the height of a coat hook in an accessible toilet or the testing of a loop to IEC standards and things like that. So that's me. Thanks.